The opening of a tragedy in America. Let me take you on a journey today, a journey into the labyrinthine heart of America, where ambition, money, love, and darkness twine together in a tale straight out of a suspense novel. It's a story that makes me shudder every time I recall it, and not just because of the violence or loss, but the raw humanity exposed along the way. Our story begins not just in any city but in Los Angeles, the City of Angels. The nickname sounds heavenly, but behind the dazzling nightlife and the palm tree-lined boulevards, shadows linger in the corners. It's the summer of 2002. The turn of the new millennium had washed over the city, yet LA remained what it always had been. A city of dreams, and sometimes of nightmares. I can picture it now, luminescent skyscrapers reflecting the pink California dusk, boulevards buzzing with convertibles, aspiring actors and throngs of people hunting for luck, love, and a quick ticket to the big time. There's a sense that anything could happen here, and often does. But beneath this glimmering facade lay another Los Angeles, one woven from the ambitions of outsiders and the harsh realities of survival, from bustling Koreatown to neon-lit downtown, from the luxurious sprawl of Beverly Hills to the quieter, blue-collar neighborhoods to the south. Everyone was chasing some version of the American dream. Some built it brick by brick, others tried to take shortcuts. Record-high housing costs, the lure of Hollywood, the promise of Silicon Valley riches, and the proximity of the Pacific Ocean bred a unique clash between grit and glamour. The story I'm about to tell winds through those contrasts, because this is not just about one family and a criminal plot. This is a snapshot of American aspiration, temptation, and the razor-thin divide between prosperity and tragedy. Imagine being in the thick of it, the air tingling with anticipation as dusk settles. Limousines at every corner, laughter spilling from chic rooftop bars, paparazzi flashing in front of velvet ropes. And yet, for every starlit night, there are as many stories unfolding in shadows. Stories destined never to reach the silver screen. This particular tragedy may seem extraordinary, but it's only possible because it's so heartbreakingly ordinary. Born from the same desires, pressures, and deceptions that run through the city's veins. And so, with that uneasy blend of hope and foreboding that is so uniquely American, we step back to 2002, back to a moment when a family's fate would be rewritten forever. The prosperity of Los Angeles. Los Angeles in the early 2000s was a city pulsing with an energy unlike anywhere else in the United States. From the air, Louisiana stretched endlessly, a sprawling patchwork of glittering lights, palm-lined boulevards, and neighborhoods as diverse as the dreams they incubated. To newcomers, the city was both a promise and a challenge, a place where fortunes rose overnight and vanished just as quickly. By day, the sun drenched everything in a golden hue, from the sleek glass towers of downtown to the historic Art Deco facades lining Wilshire Boulevard. Beverly Hills, with its rows of perfectly manicured palms and opulent mansions, embodied old Hollywood glamour, while the boutiques and diners of Melrose and Fairfax pulsed with cutting-edge youth culture. The hum of convertible engines, the glitter of luxury storefronts, and the constant movement of people all mingled to create a climate of perpetual excitement. Down by the coast, Venice Beach teemed with life, bodybuilders at Muscle Beach, artists sketching in the sand, street performers gathering crowds with break dancing or fire tricks. Surfers chased the perfect wave while families and lovers watched the sun melt into the Pacific, painting the sky in streaks of orange and lavender. Los Angeles was not just a city, it was an ever-evolving stage where every resident played multiple roles in the daily drama. But beyond the postcard-perfect sights lay a captivating paradox. For every red carpet event in Hollywood or high-end gala in Santa Monica, there were tent encampments on forgotten downtown streets. LA's prosperity a mosaic of both glitter and grit. Immigrants arrived from Mexico, Central America, Korea, Armenia, and beyond, chasing opportunity and working tirelessly to carve out a place in the city's sprawling economy. At the same time, well-heeled professionals navigated the world of tech startups, movie studios, and real estate deals, always searching for the next big break. Perhaps nowhere was LA's prosperity and its temptations more apparent than after dark. Sunset Boulevard came alive with neon signs, pulsing music, and limousines waiting outside velvet-roped clubs. Those with means indulged in the most exclusive night spots, dining in rooftop lounges or gambling behind closed doors at private casinos nestled in the hills. Elsewhere, partygoers and hopefuls crowded the bars and lounges of West Hollywood or Koreatown, their laughter and ambition as thick in the air as the scent of perfume and expensive cigars. Behind the scenes, cash flowed through every corner of the city, in art galleries, film productions, tech conventions, and luxury shopping malls. The rich flaunted their wealth, Ferraris, diamonds, penthouses with panoramic views, while others hustled, dreaming of getting their own slice of LA heaven. For some, the prosperity was a tightrope walk, balancing the thrills of high living against the ever-present threat of failure, addiction, or betrayal. Against this glamorous, tumultuous backdrop, the city's darker impulses also thrived. The lines between legal and illicit grew blurry at night. Multi-million-dollar deals sometimes overlapped with underworld transactions. People could reinvent themselves overnight or disappear just as quickly, swallowed by the city's endless maze of lights and shadows. In LA, everything was possible, and nothing was quite as it seemed. It was within this world, of sky-high ambition, privilege, and peril, that the story of Stephen Miller would unfold. Surrounded by the city's prosperity, he believed he had found both love and success. But beneath the surface, hidden among the palm trees and bright lights, forces were gathering. Tragedy was taking shape, and soon, the facade of Los Angeles's prosperity would begin to crack. Introducing the character, Stephen Dixon. At the heart of this intricate and ultimately tragic story stands Stephen Dixon, a man whose life from the outside seemed like the very embodiment of the American dream. Born on March 27, 1970, in the blue-collar community of Rochester, New York, Stephen grew up in a modest house on a quiet, tree-lined street. He was the eldest of 3 children, a big brother to 2 younger sisters, both of whom adored him for his easy smile and gentle guidance. Life in the Dixon household was simple, even unremarkable, but it was built on the unshakable foundation of family, love, and hard work. Stephen's childhood was marked by mischief and curiosity, traits that would one day fuel his success. He had a knack for tinkering with radios and home computers, often pulling apart household gadgets just to see how they worked. While other neighborhood kids played ball in the street, Stephen was just as likely to be hunched over in his makeshift basement lab, assembling circuit boards with his father's old toolbox. His natural talent with technology stood out even in the early 1980s, a time when personal computing was still considered a novelty to most American families. But beneath the laughter and family warmth, a storm was brewing. Stephen's world was turned upside down at age 14 when his father was killed in a car accident, a devastating loss that cast a long, dark shadow on the Dixon family. The grief was nearly overwhelming, but it became an inflection point in Stephen's life. Thrust into the role of man of the house, he matured almost overnight, stepping up to support his mother and sisters with a stoicism well beyond his years. His mother, Carol Dixon, was a pillar of quiet strength. She eventually found love again in Alan Brooks, a kind-hearted local high school teacher who brought much-needed stability back into their lives. Alan treated Stephen and his sisters as his own, and his gentle encouragement allowed Stephen to redouble his focus on academics and, especially, technology. Carol and Alan worked hard to make ends meet, but they supported Stephen's interests wherever they could. A second-hand computer here, a trip to the local science fair there, small investments that would pay off in ways none of them could have known at the time. Stephen's commitment paid off. By his late teens, he was fluent in computer programming, self-taught, ambitious, and hungry for knowledge in a field that was about to explode with potential. He won scholarships, completed internships, and at 21, graduated at the top of his class from New York University with a degree in computer science. The world beyond Rochester beckoned, and Stephen, driven by a sense of adventure and the relentless pursuit of innovation, answered its call. His first break came not in Silicon Valley, but in the bustling tech sector of Seattle. There, Stephen quickly made a name for himself, leading development teams for major software companies in an industry that was starting to reshape the way Americans lived and worked. His reputation grew. He was known as both a technical wizard and a charismatic leader, thoughtful with his colleagues, tireless in his efforts, and always one step ahead of the curve. After a few years of rapid advancement, Stephen was headhunted by a multinational tech firm headquartered in Los Angeles, the city of ambition and reinvention. They offered him triple his Seattle salary and a coveted director's position before he turned 30. For Stephen, it was a dream come true, albeit one that came with immense responsibility and, as it would turn out, considerable risk. In LA, Stephen Dixon flourished. His annual income easily surpassed $100,000. More than enough to afford him a sleek penthouse apartment in Westwood and a souped-up convertible in the building's underground garage. At work, he led a young team developing security software for Fortune 500 companies, while outside the office, he mingled with the city's new elite, tech entrepreneurs, movie producers, and ambitious socialites. Colleagues respected him not just for his intelligence, but for his approachability and decency in an industry often driven by ego. Yet all this success masked a longing inside Stephen. After years of striving, he wanted more than just material comfort. He wanted connection, family, and a sense of belonging that couldn't be bought or coded. He often sent money home to his mother and sisters, made time for their holiday reunions, and kept in touch with childhood friends who'd never left upstate New York. While glamorous parties and late-night dinners made for dazzling photographs, Stephen's real happiness sprang from simpler moments. A phone call to his mother, a campfire by Lake Ontario, a handwritten birthday card. Lonely at times in the City of Angels, Stephen filled his downtime with hobbies as ambitious as his career. He joined the Los Angeles Flying Club, taking lessons every Saturday at Santa Monica Airport. The feeling of piloting a small plane above the sprawling city was both exhilarating and liberating, one place where the pressure of his tech career seemed to melt away. This drive for success and fulfillment, his generosity to those around him, and his resilience after personal tragedy shaped Stephen Dixon into an extraordinary figure. To his friends and family, he was a role model, a dreamer, and a provider. To the outside world, he was a rising star poised to leave his mark on LA's fiercely competitive tech landscape. But even as Stephen lived out his American dream in the City of Angels, the fate awaiting him was anything but heavenly. Neither his intelligence, charm, nor resourcefulness would be enough to shield him from the forces gathering inexorably in the city's shadows. Forces that would one day make Stephen Dixon's name synonymous not with prosperity, but with mystery, heartbreak, and betrayal. The journey to professional success. Stephen Dixon's progression from ambitious small-town kid to high-flying technology executive was anything but ordinary. After graduating magna cum laude from New York University with a degree in computer science, Stephen felt the world crack open, possibilities sprawling before him like the LA freeways he'd only seen in movies. He had always been bold in his dreams, and now, the real test would be what he could achieve far from the comforts of home. His career started in Seattle, riding the crest of the dot-com boom. The air was electric with invention. Stephen joined a promising tech startup as a junior developer, focused on data encryption, a field that was both sexy and practical at a time when businesses were just learning the value and peril of their own data. He worked late nights, sometimes forgetting to eat, because the thrill of chasing a software breakthrough outweighed every other desire. When his company landed a landmark deal with a major financial institution, Stephen's code formed the backbone of the product. He was rewarded with a promotion, a pay raise, and perhaps more satisfying, a newfound respect from industry veterans twice his age. Within a few years, Stephen's name was quietly whispered at tech conferences and networking events. Recruiters began reaching out from across the country. He fielded calls from Silicon Valley, Austin, and even Boston, but one offer stood out. A Los Angeles venture capital-backed firm wanted him as their director of engineering. The firm, riding a cultural and technological gold rush in Los Angeles, promised Stephen autonomy, lucrative stock options, and a chance to lead his own team working on security software for enterprise clients. The move was a risk, but Stephen never shied away from challenge. He accepted and relocated to LA in a whirlwind. Settling into the sprawling metropolis, Stephen was both awed and slightly daunted. The city vibrated with energy, art, and ambition. His new office on the 47th floor of a glass tower afforded him sweeping views. One moment he was overseeing software architecture, the next he was rubbing elbows with film producers in the building's lobby. The tech scene in LA was smaller than Silicon Valley's, but it was fierce, fueled by cross-pollination from the film industry, fashion, and finance. Stephen saw opportunity everywhere. As director, he mentored a diverse team, coders from Caltech, project leads from film studios doing technical pivots, and even a few young immigrants passionate about making their mark. Under Stephen's leadership, the team rolled out a cutting-edge security suite, earning accolades from industry giants and a slew of lucrative contracts. He learned to navigate boardrooms as deftly as he did servers, his presentation skills as sharp and persuasive as his technical prowess. But with success came immense pressure. Shareholders demanded growth. Competitors circled like sharks. Stephen's days began before dawn and often ended well past midnight. he found himself swept into the social scene of LA's upper echelons, networking events in rooftop gardens, high-stakes rounds of golf in Malibu, and the ever-present expectation to be the face of innovation. The trappings of success followed: a modern apartment in Westwood, his first luxury car, invitations to exclusive functions. Yet Stephen remained grounded, sending money home every month and calling his family before every big deal. Every leap forward was balanced by a memory of where he started and why he worked as hard as he did. Despite the frequent stress and the weight of others' expectations, Stephen relished the autonomy and impact his role offered. Each win was personal, a validation of every choice and sacrifice, from late nights coding as a teenager to the relentless drive that now defined his public persona. He was scaling the ladder, but in his heart, he knew what he valued most: the freedom to build, lead, and ultimately, to create a life that reached far beyond mere professional achievements. Stephen Dixon's progression from ambitious small-town kid to high-flying technology executive was anything but ordinary. After graduating magna cum laude from New York University with a degree in computer science, Stephen felt the world crack open, possibilities sprawling before him like the LA freeways he'd only seen in movies. He had always been bold in his dreams, and now, the real test would be what he could achieve far from the comforts of home. His career started in Seattle, riding the crest of the dot-com boom. The air was electric with invention. Stephen joined a promising tech startup as a junior developer, focused on data encryption, a field that was both sexy and practical at a time when businesses were just learning the value and peril of their own data. He worked late nights, sometimes forgetting to eat because the thrill of chasing a software breakthrough outweighed every other desire. When his company landed a landmark deal with a major financial institution, Stephen's code formed the backbone of the product. He was rewarded with a promotion, a pay raise, and, perhaps more satisfying, a newfound respect from industry veterans twice his age. Within a few years, Stephen's name was quietly whispered at tech conferences and networking events. Recruiters began reaching out from across the country. He fielded calls from Silicon Valley, Austin, and even Boston. But one offer stood out. A Los Angeles venture capital-backed firm wanted him as their director of engineering. The firm, riding a cultural and technological gold rush in Los Angeles, promised Stephen autonomy, lucrative stock options, and a chance to lead his own team working on security software for enterprise clients. The move was a risk, but Stephen never shied away from challenge. He accepted and relocated to LA in a whirlwind. Settling into the sprawling metropolis, Stephen was both awed and slightly daunted. The city vibrated with energy, art, and ambition. His new office on the 47th floor of a glass tower afforded him sweeping views. One moment he was overseeing software architecture, the next he was rubbing elbows with film producers in the building's lobby. The tech scene in LA was smaller than Silicon Valley's, but it was fierce, fueled by cross-pollination from the film industry, fashion, and finance. Stephen saw opportunity everywhere. As director, he mentored a diverse team: coders from Caltech, project leads from film studios doing technical pivots, and even a few young immigrants passionate about making their mark. Under Stephen's leadership, the team rolled out a cutting-edge security suite, earning accolades from industry giants and a slew of lucrative contracts. He learned to navigate boardrooms as deftly as he did servers, his presentation skills as sharp and persuasive as his technical prowess. But with success came immense pressure. Shareholders demanded growth, competitors circled like sharks. Stephen's days began before dawn and often ended well past midnight. He found himself swept into the social scene of LA's upper echelons, networking events in rooftop gardens, high-stakes rounds of golf in Malibu, and the ever-present expectation to be the face of innovation. The trappings of success followed: a modern apartment in Westwood, his first luxury car, invitations to exclusive functions. Yet Stephen remained grounded, sending money home every month and calling his family before every big deal. Every leap forward was balanced by a memory of where he started and why he worked as hard as he did. Despite the frequent stress and the weight of others' expectations, Stephen relished the autonomy and impact his role offered. Each win was personal, a validation of every choice and sacrifice. From late nights coding as a teenager to the relentless drive that now defined his public persona. He was scaling the ladder, but in his heart he knew what he valued most: the freedom to build, lead, and ultimately, to create a life that reached far beyond mere professional achievements. Of course, nothing about Stephen's journey was linear or without setbacks. There were deals that fell apart at the last minute, software rollouts plagued with bugs, grueling rounds of layoffs during economic downturns, and moments when imposter syndrome gnawed at his confidence. On more than one occasion, he contemplated leaving it all behind for the comfort of upstate New York, but the thrill of impact, and the allure of a city where reinvention seemed always within reach, kept him in the game. Through it all, Stephen never forgot the lessons from his roots: humility, perseverance, and the value of community. He mentored entry-level programmers, sponsored STEM workshops for underprivileged teens in LA, and carved out moments for honest reflection, even during the city's most frenzied weeks. This blend of ambition and integrity, forged in hardship and tested on the neon-bright stage of Los Angeles, defined not just Stephen's career, but the very core of who he was becoming. Fateful love. Stephen's tech career brought him financial security and a certain standing among Los Angeles's ambitious elite, but it didn't fill the emptiness he sometimes felt when he returned to his quiet apartment at night. Success, he realized, was hollow when experienced in isolation. Most evenings he preferred low-key activities, reading, walking through city parks, or visiting art exhibits. Yet deep down he longed for connection, a genuine relationship that could ground him in the midst of constant change. That longing led him one Friday night to the buzzing heart of Hollywood. A friend had invited him to a high-end club, a place swathed in neon where the city's beautiful and restless gathered after dark. The club pulsed with energy and promise, strangers' laughter floated through the air, conversations overlapped in multiple languages, and champagne was served as casually as water. Stephen, never comfortable with excess, felt slightly out of place but allowed himself to be swept up by the thrill of possibility. Amidst it all, he met Emily. Everything about her radiated contrast to the crowd. She was elegant yet unpretentious, calm yet exuding a spark of quiet rebellion. Emily was originally from South Central Los Angeles, a world away from the glitz of Hollywood. She had moved to the city as a teenager, seeking a better life after a childhood marked by hardship and familial struggle. Working odd jobs and performing as a dancer in clubs, she carried a deep resilience beneath her charm. They talked for hours, the noise of the club fading as they discovered unexpected similarities. Both grew up without privilege, both valued family, and both bore invisible scars from their past. For Stephen, it was the first time in ages that he felt seen. Not for his accomplishments, but for who he truly was. Emily's laugh was infectious, her perspective grounded. Over the weeks that followed, Stephen found himself drawn deeper into Emily's world. He met her friends, most of whom shared her gritty determination to make it in Los Angeles. They spent afternoons exploring the city, sharing street food on Melrose, watching the sunset from Griffith Observatory, and opening up about dreams that had often seemed out of reach. Emily's background gave Stephen a window into parts of LA he had never known, neighborhoods bursting with resilience, local music clubs, hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and the challenges facing those born on the city's margins. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. Both brought shadows from the past to the relationship. There were moments of tension, financial worries, doubts about the future, and unspoken fears that they might be from two irreconcilable worlds. Yet Stephen admired Emily's independence and admired how she had channeled every setback into strength. She in turn saw in him a gentleness and depth rare in the city's competitive circles. Their connection deepened through vulnerability. Stephen shared stories of his father's accident and the loneliness that had colored his successes. Emily opened up about her family's struggles with addiction, the nights she'd spent fending for herself, and her fierce desire to protect those she loved. Through those confessions, trust grew. The boundaries between their respective worlds began to blur. Love blossomed, not despite their differences, but because of them. For Stephen, being with Emily meant more than romance. Her presence grounded him, helped him confront personal insecurities, and re-examine what he truly valued in life. To Emily, Stephen offered refuge, a partner who accepted her history and encouraged her ambitions, seeing her dreams as equal to his own. Yet in the city of boundless opportunity and countless temptations, even genuine love was shadowed by the pressures and uncertainties of the world outside. Their story, so full of promise and hope, would soon be tested in ways neither could have anticipated. 1. The surveillance system and the enigma of blind spots. Though the building that housed Adam and Olivia was lauded for its cutting-edge security, the reality detectives soon confronted was more nuanced and oddly vulnerable. The high-rise prided itself on more than 20 digital cameras. Sleek, dome-shaped apparatuses blinked reassuring red in every hallway, elevator, and entryway, all feeding into a central security room on the ground floor. To residents, these cameras were an omnipresent shield. In theory, not a single person could come or go without being captured in crisp high definition. That, at least, was the illusion. The forensic team, led by NYPD's Technical Surveillance Unit, immediately took possession of the full server's backup. Hundreds of hours of footage flickered across their workstation screens. Grainy elevator rides, fumbled keycards in dimly lit hallways, pizza deliveries and doormen clicking through shift changes, yet as they scrolled, a disorienting pattern emerged. For all the supposed fail-safes, there were holes in the system, sometimes just a few seconds long, sometimes stretching for minutes. In a few areas the cameras were angled just so, leaving pockets around stairwell doors and trash chutes untouched. Initial analysis confirmed the coverage stats on the promotional brochures, 95% visibility of all primary access routes. But it was the other 5% that now felt all-important. A particularly problematic gap appeared near the emergency stairwell on the north wing. The nearest camera's lens ended its sweep with an abrupt cutoff less than 2 feet before the doorknob, creating a track of maybe 10 seconds where a quick, purposeful person could move unseen. Similarly, the doors to the service elevator and a less-used loading bay were aged units originally intended for deliveries. Their cameras were lower-grade black-and-white analogs sourced from the building's pre-renovation phase. These offered only vague silhouettes, not the facial clarity everywhere else. Detectives mapped out these blind spots meticulously, constructing a virtual risk grid overlay atop the architect's floor plans. Chronic maintenance notes from the building manager's logs revealed that, several times a year, tweaks and repairs left certain cameras either inactive or looping old coverage for hours at a stretch. Most such downtime was brief, but the timing gnawed at the investigators. One access log suggested the north stairwell camera was reset at 3:18 a.m. on May 28, only hours after Adam and Olivia were last seen. Was this corruption random, or did someone with insight into the complex's rhythms exploit an opportunity known only to insiders? The detective sergeant overseeing video review expressed frustration in a late-night police memo. "We assume technology keeps us safe. In reality, it's a thin net. All it takes is one thread to break, and anyone determined enough can slip through." Outside-the-box theorists, including a few seasoned detectives, speculated, what if Adam and Olivia, alone or with help, learned these vulnerabilities? Residents like them, who'd lived in the penthouse long enough to watch 6 seasons of repairmen traipsing past on their way to bent cameras and blinking routers, might have noticed the quirks. Alternatively, a collaborator from among the night shift staff, whose access codes changed monthly but whose routines were almost clockwork, could have known which cameras to avoid in a pinch. It raised uncomfortable questions about possible inside knowledge or collusion within the maintenance or security staff, though background checks yielded nothing immediately damning. Further complicating matters was Camera 14, the unit tasked with overlaying both the recycling chute door and a chunk of wall between 2 service closets, a location described by tenants as a dead pocket where the Wi-Fi always drops out. Footage from Camera 14 in the hours before and after the disappearance was patchy. Technicians from the manufacturer blamed an interference spike. Some suggested it was simple sensor failure, others entertained the possibility of illegal jamming, though evidence of such activity was circumstantial at best. Another angle emerged when detectives obtained older blueprints of the building. Before its 2015 luxury renovation, the structure was a pair of conjoined pre-war walk-ups with labyrinthine corridors and odd architectural quirks. Could some old passage or sealed access point have been missed by the camera sweep altogether? Inspectors brought in by the police spent days probing drywall and maintenance closets, searching for evidence of a forgotten backstairs or crawl space that, just maybe, allowed someone to move through the building undetected. Their search produced only spiderwebs, and yet the absence of proof was itself unnerving. The NYPD's AV specialists also examined digital tampering. Could someone have hacked the cloud server storing footage, erasing or superimposing innocuous scenes? Forensic sweeps revealed no digital footprints, but experts cautioned that an inside technical actor, familiar with both the hardware and software, could conceivably mask a breach if they moved quickly and with precision. The apartment complex's tight-knit IT staff, all vetted and with years of spotless employment, nonetheless faced extensive questioning. No evidence of illicit access emerged, though, as one cyberforensics consultant dryly put it, sometimes the best hack is knowing when no one's looking at all. Pressure mounted as frustrated detectives weighed mundane error against deliberate manipulation. Could the couple, perhaps panicking or desperate, have made a dash through a known dead zone? Or did a third party, unseen by digital eyes, engineer their disappearance using the few-second window afforded by imperfect surveillance? These blind spots grew in collective imagination, from minor oversights into portals of possibility, their uncertainty fueling dozens of wild theories in public and private alike. By the second week, what began as a search for faces on a screen had evolved into a philosophical debate about the limits of surveillance. The reassurance of a world always watched, assumed to guarantee safety and truth, had proven to be a paper shield. When Adam and Olivia's case was discussed on late-night news, pundits fixated on the curse of the camera blind spot, with guests debating whether the modern era's obsession with surveillance wasn't more illusion than assurance. Each moment lost to those brief but crucial gaps in vision became, as the lead detective wrote, a little black hole, swallowing certainty, leaving only questions in their wake. Cracks in marriage. As the golden haze of newlywed bliss faded, Stephen and Emily found themselves swept up by the ever-accelerating demands and distractions of life in Los Angeles. The mansion on the hill, once a symbol of hope and shared accomplishment, slowly morphed into a fortress of secrets, silences, and unspoken tensions. Their days began to follow separate orbits, Stephen perpetually busy with his skyrocketing career and endless projects, and Emily swept into a social scene both dazzling and daunting, trying to carve out a place among neighbors who would never quite see her as one of their own. At first, the cracks were nearly invisible, buried beneath layers of politeness, pride, and daily schedules packed to the brim. Stephen justified late nights at the office with talk of new contracts, ambitious product launches, and the need to stay ahead of the curve. Software demos, business dinners, and conference calls ran late into the evening, with the tech world's constant pressure for innovation and growth leaving little emotional space for home life. Emily, while outwardly supportive, felt increasingly sidelined. The man who once set aside time for long walks or spontaneous adventures was now too exhausted even for conversation at the dinner table. Emily's world, too, was evolving at a dizzying pace. The social calendar that looked so glamorous from the outside grew overwhelming, filled with charity galas, art openings, book clubs she'd never heard of, and lunch dates with women whose hands were always perfectly manicured and whose laughter carried a subtle edge. She could never quite shake the sensation of being a visitor, welcome but always on someone else's terms. In response, Emily threw herself into the role of the perfect hostess, planning extravagant parties, donating to local causes, and keeping up appearances in a world where image was everything. The expectation to maintain a flawless facade slowly chipped away at her confidence. Every slight or sideways glance from Stephen's colleagues and their spouses felt like a reminder of her outsider status. Yet Emily was determined to measure up. Spending became a way to keep score. Designer clothes, imported wines, custom furnishings for the house. Each new acquisition briefly soothed the feeling of inadequacy, only to make the emptiness more acute once the thrill faded. Stephen, meanwhile, watched the mounting bills with a mix of concern and resignation. He recognized the anxiety beneath Emily's newfound extravagance but was unsure how to broach the subject without risking a fight. His own upbringing, frugal, practical, grounded in the belief that love and loyalty mattered more than luxury, clashed with the glamour of their current life. Sometimes, sitting in his home office late at night, he wondered whether their success had created more distance than it bridged. Miscommunication flourished in the gaps left by their busy schedules. Stephen saw himself as a provider, believing that hard work and financial security were displays of love, but Emily craved something more immediate: time, touch, and honest conversation. Simple disagreements about spending, about parenting styles, about which friends to invite over, began to snowball, evolving into fraught circular arguments that left both feeling unheard and misunderstood. Adding to the growing strain were subtle but persistent reminders of their different backgrounds. Emily's family, visiting from South Central, felt out of place at Stephen's corporate soirees, their warmth and blunt humor often mistaken for rudeness by the city's social elite. Stephen tried to bridge the divide, making grand gestures and deliberately including Emily's friends in gatherings, but he could sense a quiet tension simmering beneath the civility. The children, while a source of mutual joy, sometimes became collateral in their parents' emotional crossfire. Stephen wanted them to learn resilience and humility, lessons he'd absorbed through hardship. Emily, conversely, was determined they never experience shame or exclusion. These conflicting philosophies led to gentle disagreements at first, then heated debates. For the first time, the possibility that their marriage could become mere performance, a tableau of perfect family life hiding deeper fractures, began to haunt Stephen. To outsiders, nothing seemed amiss. On Instagram, the Dixons' lives gleamed: sunset family portraits, glamorous travel, perfectly styled holiday gatherings. Yet the digital sheen masked a pervasive sense of loneliness in both partners. Stephen found himself confiding less and less in Emily, instead pouring his frustrations into work or solitary hobbies like flying. He relished the freedom of the open sky, the sense of escape from obligations waiting for him at home. Emily, meanwhile, searched for solace in friendships, old and new, sometimes rekindling bonds with people from her past who understood what it meant to feel lost among strangers. As months passed, small acts of secrecy crept into their lives. Stephen would take long business calls out of earshot and occasionally linger at networking events for just one more drink. Emily, too, grew furtive, quietly withdrawing large sums of money for reasons she kept vague, slipping out to meet friends without specifying where she was headed. What began as minor evasions soon hardened into habit. Each suspected the other held secrets, yet neither found the courage to confront the truth. Their arguments grew sharper, apologies rarer. One evening the simmering tension boiled over. A dispute about finances escalated quickly, unearthing buried resentments. Stephen accused Emily of caring more about status than substance, while Emily fired back that Stephen had become cold, remote, and dismissive of her efforts to belong. The fight left both shaken, but rather than address the root of their disconnect, they retreated further into themselves. The routines of work, parenting, and social obligation continued, but the intimacy that once defined their marriage became increasingly elusive. There were attempts to mend things: a surprise weekend getaway, counseling sessions squeezed into already overcrowded weeks, letters left on pillows as tokens of goodwill. But each effort seemed to run aground on the unspoken fears that had taken root. Fear of failure, of irreconcilable differences, of losing not just a spouse but the fragile future they'd worked so hard to build. Emily sometimes wondered if she'd ever truly belonged in their world. Stephen questioned whether love alone could withstand the relentless pressures of ambition and expectation. Eventually, the boundary between their public persona and private lives became nearly impenetrable. They hosted parties, attended fundraisers, and smiled for photos, but intimacy had been replaced by performance, affection by obligation. In quiet moments, both grappled with a nagging sense of regret, wondering when and how the distance between them had become so vast. The horrific incident. The humid July air in downtown Los Angeles hung heavy that evening, even after the sun had surrendered to dusk. Stephen Dixon was nearing the tail end of a grueling day, meetings that ran long, a heated call with a challenging client in New York, and yet another software deployment snag. The digital pulse of his company rarely rested, and neither did he. But tonight he'd promised himself a small reprieve, a quiet dinner with his trusted colleague Michael, in the rented city apartment he used as a midweek crash pad. After hours, this place carved out a rare pocket of stillness, a sanctuary from glitzy parties and endless professional demands. Stephen let Michael in with a tired grin, tossing his laptop bag to the corner with a sense of deliberate finality. They exchanged stories of recent work struggles, laughed over stale takeout, and talked about family back home. Michael admired Stephen's ability to hold on to simple values despite the temptations swirling outside. The two shared an ease that only genuine friendship could foster. By 11, the city outside was purring with nightlife, but inside the apartment, all was subdued. Suddenly, the tranquility shattered. There was a muffled sound, a metallic clunk, out of place, followed by swift movement in the hallway. Neither man had the chance to stand before the front door burst open. In a single, chaos-laced moment, 3 masked figures swept in, moving with the cold focus of seasoned criminals. The leader's eyes, visible behind his balaclava, glimmered with something colder than greed: intent. The men wielded pistols, their voices sharp and practiced. Michael's heart leapt into his throat. Stephen's mind raced. Was this a robbery? A kidnapping? "Hands up! Face down! Nobody gets hurt!" Stephen and Michael obeyed. The invaders demanded cash, valuables, anything of worth. For a second, Stephen thought it would end as just another tragic break-in, the kind Los Angeles media churned out with numb regularity. But when Stephen handed over his watch and the few bills in his wallet, their leader didn't signal retreat. Instead, there was tense whispering in the intruders' camp. One recognized Stephen, maybe by face, maybe by name. Plans shifted. Moments that unfurled felt endless. Stephen's brain flickered between pleading for calm and searching for a way to diffuse the tension. Michael, breathing hard, tried to reason with the men, offering more money, begging them to leave without violence, but as adrenaline spiked, so did the danger. With chilling finality, the ringleader pointed his weapon at Stephen. The next seconds blurred, a scuffle, a flash, the sharp retort of gunfire ripped through the cramped room. 4 shots. Each one carved a memory into Michael's mind that would never fade. He ducked reflexively, feeling hot pain graze his shoulder, a bullet wound, though he barely registered it through the shock. The intruders fled as swiftly as they'd arrived, footsteps thundering down the stairwell. Silence reclaimed the space, broken only by Michael's ragged breathing and the awful realization dawning in his eyes. Stephen was motionless on the floor, crimson spreading fast beneath him. His hand twitched, reaching as if for something just out of grasp. "Stephen! Stephen, stay with me, man! Don't you dare!" Michael's voice cracked with horror and disbelief. He dialed 911, his hands slippery, every second snagged in a nightmare loop. Paramedics arrived on a tide of blaring sirens, splitting the peace of the night. The police, faces set to practice neutrality, combed the scene for evidence. Shell casings, splinters from the forced door, footprints already fading in hallway dust. Michael, his shirt sticky with his own blood and Stephen's, replayed the events through frantic retellings, desperate to give investigators anything that might make sense of the carnage. Neighbors gathered in the dim-lit corridor, wide-eyed and whispering, each aware that proximity to tragedy was now part of their own story. Stephen, during those fleeting moments as the EMTs worked, floated in and out of consciousness. He saw faces, his mother, his sisters, Emily, his young children, glimpses spiraling through the haze. Regret pooled in his chest, heavier than blood loss, unfinished conversations, birthdays missed, the half-glimpsed smile of his son at breakfast. He tried to speak, one last time, but the world was pulling away. By the time the ambulance wheeled off, neon lights streaking the windows, Los Angeles had claimed another soul, a man known by many, understood by few. A mother who would not accept her fate. Marcia Dixon had always been known for her quiet warmth, a gentle soul more comfortable with baking pies than mounting a crusade. But when the brutal news of Stephen's death arrived, her entire world reeled off its axis. In the days after the funeral, Marcia drifted like a husk through her upstate New York home, clutching her son's faded childhood photographs, haunted by memories of his laugh, his stubborn kindness, his promises that he would always return. What shocked Marcia most was not only the violence itself, but the cold, procedural way the authorities seemed eager to file Stephen's case away. The Los Angeles police called it a well-executed robbery gone wrong. "Just a tragic statistic," they told her flatly on the phone, a line she played over and over in her mind. Something about it didn't sit right in the marrow of her bones. Stephen had called her more than once, just weeks before his death, and Marcia remembered those conversations with new clarity. She'd sensed a tension behind his words, a tiredness that didn't sound like ordinary work stress. When she'd pressed, Stephen quickly changed the subject. Now that unease flowered into suspicion, despite the reassurances of well-meaning friends who urged her to accept the official story and let grief run its course. But a mother's intuition is not so easily dismissed, especially one as fiercely devoted as Marcia Dixon. While friends and neighbors brought over casseroles and cards, Marcia found herself unable to sit still. Late at night, as the wind rattled the eaves, she sat at the kitchen table with Stephen's emails, old voicemails, bank statements, and scrap paper notes. Details, so easy to overlook, began piecing together in her determined mind. Why had Emily, Stephen's widow, behaved so distant and evasive, barely making eye contact at the service? Why had she refused to speak at length to Marcia, or share full details about that night? Driven more by instinct than evidence at first, Marcia began the daunting task of advocating for her son. She tracked down Michael, the friend who was with Stephen during the attack. They spoke in halting, tear-filled phone calls. Michael described the night in meticulous detail, but he too harbored an unsettling feeling. How swiftly the intruders had acted, the way they seemed oddly familiar with Stephen's routines, or the hush-hush attitude of Emily in the aftermath. Marcia poured her modest savings into hiring a private investigator, a weathered, methodical ex-cop named David Lee, whose hardened demeanor hid a surprising streak of empathy. They became an unlikely team. David taught Marcia to examine evidence piece by piece, unusual credit card transactions from Emily, unfamiliar phone numbers in Stephen's call logs, coded text messages that made no sense out of context. Marcia called it mother's homework, yet it was more like an act of devotion, a way to keep Stephen close and keep his memory from slipping away beneath bureaucracy and lies. Week after week Marcia pressed on. She traced Emily's acquaintances, confirming her suspicions of unusual friendships and seeing through half-truths. Driving down to Los Angeles herself, a city so unlike the small town she'd always called home, Marcia met with lawyers, police officers, even Stephen's old neighbors who still remembered his kindness and generosity. Her accent and gentle manners stood in stark contrast to the city's hard edges, but the steel in her resolve hardened with every closed door or patronizing dismissal. Details began to surface. A neighbor in the LA apartment mentioned seeing Emily arrive suspiciously late at night with a man who didn't match Stephen's description. Another friend, sensing Marcia's pain, relayed that Emily had mentioned coming into money soon, only weeks before Stephen's death. The private investigator discovered that Emily had made a substantial withdrawal from their joint savings account shortly after the funeral, and that she'd consulted with an attorney about inheritance laws well before Marcia was even notified of the coroner's report. As days turned into months, Marcia's circles widened. She assembled a dossier of emails, photographs, receipts, and phone logs, each small clue adding weight to her suspicions. Along the way, she met other parents whose children had died under suspicious circumstances, kindred spirits who offered advice, legal contacts, and unconditional support. Their stories sharpened her conviction. The fight for justice was always uphill, but it was never fought alone. Friends in Rochester, shocked by Marcia's transformation from grieving mother to determined investigator, raised funds to help cover legal and travel expenses. Her daughters, worried yet proud, took on extra work to support her. Family dinners became strategy sessions. Holidays were spent drafting letters to police, news outlets, and legal organizations pleading for a thorough review of Stephen's case. Many went unanswered, but each was a thread in Marcia's growing tapestry of evidence, a patchwork of heartbreak and hope woven with stubborn love. One afternoon, months after the crime, Marcia sat across from the LA detective originally assigned to the case. She pushed her binder of findings across the desk, fixing him with a gaze that dared him to dismiss a mother's instinct. "If you had lost your son," she said quietly, "would you accept this as justice?" The weight of her words, and the volume of evidence, finally forced the authorities to re-examine the case. New leads were opened. Emily's phone records and financial transactions were subpoenaed. With the help of her investigator, Marcia coordinated with a local prosecutor more sympathetic to her cause. By then the toll was enormous. Marcia's savings dwindled, she aged visibly, and the stress gnawed away at her health. But what she had lost in comfort, she gained in moral clarity. Every small victory, a reluctant police callback, a confirmed inconsistency, reinforced her sense of purpose. As the investigation finally inched toward the truth, Marcia Dixon emerged as an unlikely warrior, battle-worn, yet unwavering, determined that her son's life and death would not be easily forgotten or brushed aside. Unveiling the dark conspiracy. The days that followed Marcia's unyielding persistence became a whirlwind of revelations and converging truths. As she worked closely with David Lee, the private investigator, each puzzle piece they uncovered set the stage for what would become a dramatic unraveling of secrets and betrayal, turning a seeming tragedy into the heart of a calculated, cold-blooded conspiracy. Through meticulous research, David established connections that the authorities had overlooked, either by haste, prejudice, or a creeping cynicism about urban crime. One of the first breakthrough clues was hidden in phone records. Hundreds of coded messages between Emily and a man named Marcus Harlan, a figure whose background was as shadowy as his intentions were suspect. Marcus, a local nightlife promoter, had a history of fleeting employment and brushes with the law, but what caught David's attention wasn't just Marcus's rap sheet, it was how often Emily's movements coincided with his. Surveillance photos captured them meeting late at night in dim parking lots, leaving clubs just minutes apart, or even glimpsed together through the tinted windows of an idling Lexus. Marcia's heart ached with each revelation, but she refused to let guilt, or even the burden of her suspicions, take precedence over justice for her son. The more she pushed, the clearer the motive became. Financial records painted a damning portrait. Days before Stephen's murder, Emily had taken out an additional life insurance policy on her husband, naming herself as the sole beneficiary. The premium was hefty, the paperwork rushed, and Stephen's signature, when Marcia scrutinized it, looked worryingly forged. A second withdrawal, nearly $15,000, disappeared from the couple's joint account the day after Stephen's funeral. When pressed on these matters in court filings, Emily's legal team insisted these were personal family matters not relevant to the crime, but Marcia and David saw a pattern: deception, secrecy, and a smooth attempt to erase a trail as soon as it was blazed. Linda, a friend of the Dixon family and a notary public, brought another crucial sliver of truth. She recalled an unusual visit from Emily, who seemed agitated and distracted while signing documents. Emily had made excuses, claiming Stephen was on a conference call and would sign later. But Linda, now reviewing her memory and her official notary log, realized that Stephen's signature never appeared on those forms. Combined with other irregularities, it grew evident there was intent to forge, defraud, and ultimately strip Stephen of everything he stood for, in both life and death. The most damning evidence emerged from a confession made by one of Marcus's associates, arrested on unrelated charges but pressured by detectives who'd finally started taking Marcia's evidence seriously. Under questioning, the associate revealed that Marcus and Emily had plotted for months. The plan involved luring Stephen to his apartment on the night of the attack, using Michael's dinner invitation as cover, and ensuring no security presence in the building. Their initial intent, according to the confession, was to frighten Stephen into handing over access to various online bank accounts and safe deposit boxes. But, as it often happens in messy criminal plots, what was meant as intimidation turned into deadly violence when Stephen resisted, and when Michael, unexpected collateral, unexpectedly survived. The investigation soon found surveillance footage from a nearby ATM capturing Emily and Marcus together, both wearing hooded sweatshirts, less than 2 hours before Stephen's murder. They withdrew several $1,000s, and trace cell tower pings placed Marcus, along with 2 other known associates, in the immediate vicinity of Stephen's apartment at the time of the crime. Public disclosure of these findings sent shockwaves through both the LA elite and the working-class communities of South Central. The trial of Emily Dixon rapidly turned into a media spectacle, with every tabloid and nightly news outlet dissecting the sordid details. Were Emily's motivations strictly money, or was there some deeper resentment brewing from years spent as an outsider, always measuring herself against peers who never fully welcomed her? The prosecution, piecing together circumstantial and direct evidence, leaned on the cold logic of greed and survival instincts. The defense attempted to raise doubts about the fairness of Marcia's campaign and painted Emily as a woman pushed to desperation by impossible expectations. But in the end, it was the weight of the evidence, bank records, forged signatures, coded text messages, and eyewitnesses, that toppled Emily's web of lies. The jury listened as Marcia took the stand, her voice trembling yet unwavering. She spoke not just of her suspicions, but of the love she felt for her son, and the chilling moment when she realized the greatest danger to Stephen had come from within his own family. Her testimony, paired with the factual avalanche presented by David Lee, left no doubt. Stephen's death was the result not just of random urban violence but of a meticulously planned conspiracy, orchestrated by betrayal hiding in plain sight. As the final verdict closed in, Marcia barely recognized the woman Emily had become, beautiful, poised, and yet hollowed out by her own duplicity. Looking across the courtroom, Marcia felt less hatred and more profound sorrow for all that had been lost. A son, a future, and every illusion that love alone could shield a family from the darkness lurking in the most seemingly perfect lives. Judgment and justice. The day of judgment dawned tense and gray, a muted backdrop for what many expected would be just another perfunctory courtroom drama in the heart of Los Angeles. But for Marcia Dixon and her shattered family, it marked the culmination of months, no years of relentless searching, aching loss, and dogged pursuit of the truth. In a city famed for both its dazzling facades and its shadows, a reckoning was about to unfold in room 304 of the County Superior Court. Emily emerged from the holding cell pale and composed, seated beside her counsel in a dark blazer that tried, unsuccessfully, to mask the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. Her alleged accomplice, a man whose face Marcia could never quite forget from the blurred security photos, sat 2 rows away, drumming his fingers with practiced indifference. The media crowded the benches, not quite paparazzi swarm, but here for the spectacle nonetheless, while a string of family, friends, and supporters huddled along the back. At the front, Marcia sat between her daughters, clutching a handkerchief and her faith. She had come to hate the routine of these proceedings, the procedural motions, the legal jargon, the constant delays. But today was different. Today the evidence painstakingly assembled over months, each strand woven from pain and persistence, would at last be laid bare. The prosecution was methodical. They recounted the chilling details, presenting a case that began as a supposed random break-in, but unraveled to reveal greed and calculated betrayal. Text messages were displayed on screens. Emily's cryptic exchanges with the man now in the defendant's box, coded references to the solution and life after, the sudden financial transactions traced back to days before and after Stephen's murder. Photos of Emily entering and leaving Stephen's apartment building on suspicious nights, secret meetings in cars, surveillance footage pinning her at places and times that defeated her own alibi. New witnesses, emboldened by Marcia's outreach and the revived investigation, came forward. A neighbor recounted late-night disputes between Stephen and Emily, highlighting a crescendo in the weeks leading up to the killing. Another, a friend of Emily's, admitted under oath that Emily had spoken about feeling trapped and contemplating a way out, words that, in hindsight, echoed with ominous clarity. The defense tried to muddy timelines, to cast suspicion elsewhere, to evoke sympathy for Emily's difficult upbringing and the stresses of high society, yet every cross-examination seemed only to snarl the web tighter around her and her lover. The judge, stern yet even, kept a measured tone throughout the trial. But inside the jury box, faces turned grim as the full scope of the conspiracy came into view. They listened to Michael, the friend who had survived that horrific night, testify with trembling voice, reliving the break-in, the terror, the moment when loyalty and helplessness collided. He described Stephen's final moments, the desperate attempts to save him, and the sorrowful certainty that the violence had not been aimless, but had a purpose all along. When Marcia herself took the stand, her words silenced the courtroom. She spoke not only as a grieving mother, but as an advocate for justice, detailing every discovery, every sleepless night, every barrier thrown in her path by disinterested authorities. "I lost my son, but I refuse to lose the truth," she declared, her voice wavering with emotion but never with doubt. The prosecution's closing argument struck the final note, a reminder that beneath the opulence of L.A., human ambition, jealousy, and desperation could breed unspeakable acts. They urged the jury to reject the tragic accident narrative and see the deliberate orchestration at the heart of it all. It took less than 2 full days of deliberation for the jury to reach a verdict. As word came that the decision was imminent, nerves buzzed through the courtroom. Emily looked fixedly at her lap. Her co-conspirator sat rigid, jaw clenched. Marcia inhaled sharply, feeling her heart hammer, not in anticipation of victory, but in fear of what true justice sometimes demands. The foreperson delivered the verdicts in clear, ringing tones, guilty on all counts, first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Emily's expression barely cracked at first, but as the sentences were read aloud, the weight descended visibly. Her accomplice was also convicted, their fates now entwined in the cold logic of the law. Sentencing would come weeks later, but in that moment, a measure of closure settled over the room. There were tears, of relief, grief, exhaustion rippling through the Dixon family's row. Reporters jostled for statements outside, but Marcia and her daughters slipped quietly away, their dignity intact, the ghosts of the past momentarily stilled by the promise that Stephen's story would not be forgotten. After leaving the courthouse, Marcia was awarded legal custody of Stephen's children. The grandchildren, having endured confusion and sorrow, clung to the steady presence of their grandmother. It was not the future Marcia had ever envisioned when Stephen was a boy tinkering with computers in his upstate bedroom, but she embraced it with a survivor's tenderness. She poured her dwindling funds and boundless energy into giving the kids a sense of normalcy, a safe home, therapy, family rituals that could help heal some of the wounds left by betrayal. Marcia worked hard not just for her own grandchildren but for the larger community. She kept pressing for the case's media coverage, reached out to nonprofits supporting victims' families, and began speaking to local groups about her journey through grief and the justice system. Her fight became something bigger, a symbol of how ordinary people, especially women dismissed as weak or unworldly, could move mountains when driven by love and courage. The attention brought by high-profile journalists and advocates helped prevent the case from fading into obscurity and even spurred calls for procedural reforms in the way authorities handle suspicious deaths once flagged by persistent family members. But Marcia's victories came at enormous personal cost. She drained most of her finances on legal fees and private investigation. The years spent locked in struggle took a toll on her health. Some former friends vanished in the face of tragedy. She aged rapidly, scars etched into her eyes. Yet for all she lost, what she gained, truth, justice for Stephen, and a renewed bond with her grandchildren, remained priceless. She never imagined she'd be hailed as a hero or cited in articles about resilience, but for Marcia the outcome was never about recognition. It was about righting a wrong, ensuring that Stephen's legacy was not some tragic tabloid story, but one of love prevailing, tattered, tested but unbroken, against the darkest odds. Message and conclusion. Looking back at the aftermath, I find myself changed by the currents of sorrow, hope and resolve that swirl through this story. The journey has been nothing short of a crucible, one that tests the boundaries of grief, justice, and the resilience of the human heart. If any message lingers, shimmering long after the dust settles, it is that the absence left by tragedy can be filled, not erased, never, but filled, with a deeper sense of empathy and wisdom. For Marcia, the cost of truth was measured not only in sleepless nights and empty savings accounts, but in the profound transformation from quiet homemaker to relentless warrior for her son's memory. The moral pulse of her odyssey radiates far beyond legal victory. She becomes an emblem for all who have ever been dismissed, told, just move on, or made to feel helpless in a machinery bigger and colder than themselves. Her voice, once trembling, now unyielding, challenges everyone who hears her story to question not only the narratives we inherit, but the courage it takes to claim our own justice when authorities falter. As I ponder the lives Stephen's absence rippled through, I'm struck by the fracture and the healing entwined in the family he left behind. The grandchildren, shuffled by forces beyond their control, learned what it means to grieve openly and knit new traditions from broken ones. Marcia's arms, soft but steely, became their haven. She guided them through the minefields of trauma, offering comfort that was sometimes enough, but always honest. The haunting realization that security is fleeting, especially in a world as fiercely competitive and dazzling as Los Angeles, remains a lesson branded into their identities. Emily's fate, and that of her accomplice, serve as cautionary footnotes to the seduction of easy answers and quick escapes. For a moment they believed they could outsmart the tangled web of consequence and conscience. In the end it was not only the law that ensnared them, but the inexorable momentum of secrets refusing to stay buried. Their downfall is a somber reminder that the allure of prosperity, when fueled by envy and desperation, can swallow even those who once seemed invincible. And what of justice? The trial granted a kind of reckoning, but no verdict, however righteously delivered, can undo the wound that split the Dixon family. True justice, I suspect, dwells less in the gavel's echo and more in the slow, stubborn stitching of a new life. Grandchildren laughing again, Marcia finding community among the broken and brave, even the city of Los Angeles pausing to reckon with the darkness haunting its brightest corners. For me, this story lodges a permanent ache and a strange hope. It dares me to believe that love can ignite acts of astonishing bravery, and that the struggle itself, messy, imperfect, endless, matters as much as the outcome. If I could send a message out to anyone touched by tragedy, it would be this: let your grief be a spark, not a grave. Seek the truth, no matter how winding the path, and cherish those rare moments of human connection that make all the pain bearable. The final chapter, then, is not only for Stephen, or Marcia, or the children. It is for anyone who inherits loss and searches relentlessly for meaning inside the void. We may not have happy endings waiting neatly at the finish line, but we can choose again and again to speak, to act, to mend what can be mended. That, above all, is how light outlasts the shadow, even in America, even after the darkest night.